Just the other day, Ehud Barak, the Israeli defense minister, made a speech in Hebrew. It was translated into English, where he talked about how the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is growing all over the world, presents an existential threat to Israel. Now, I don't think it's an existential threat to Israel, but it is an existential threat to Israel's racist, apartheid, and colonial system, as it should be. And this is a movement which almost every day is scoring new victories. We've seen many of them in Europe. We've seen there's the cultural boycott aspect, where major artists are now canceling appearances in Israel or refusing invitations. There's the academic aspect where, particularly in Europe, students and professors are refusing institutional connections with Israeli universities that are complicit in apartheid. And here you have the US campaign for the academic boycott of Israel, which has gained more than 500 supporters from faculty in universities around the country. Still small, but at the beginning people predicted they wouldn't get more than a few dozen, but already they're over 500. We've seen major pension funds in Europe withdrawing investments from Israel, and we've seen in many cases large cities and municipalities in Europe canceling contracts with companies that are engaged in assisting the Israeli occupation. So, for example, there has been a huge campaign against Veolia, the company that is helping Israel build a light railway to link the settlements in the West Bank. And recently, the German railways withdrew from a project in Israel as well under pressure. There are dozens and dozens of examples, and it's growing. On the way in and on your way out, be sure to stop at the table of North Carolina BDS, because this is an organization here in this city that is campaigning for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I particularly want to suggest that the young people in this room get involved with BDS campaigns, because BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, isn't just about the end result. It's not just about getting a result where a company or a group takes a decision, a courageous decision to boycott Israel. It's about educating people along the way. It's about explaining to them why the boycott is necessary and what the injustices are that necessitate this kind of ethical intervention. And I really believe that it has the chance to work. Where I agree with Jeff is I think we are at the end of this conflict. I can't tell you whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10. But Zionism in Palestine is reaching a dead end. It's reaching a demographic dead end, where Palestinians, as I mentioned, are now once again on the verge of becoming a majority once again. It is reaching a moral dead end, where it's no longer possible for Israeli officials to stand up and to justify to reasonable people the actions that Israel is taking. And it is reaching a political dead end. Even here in this country, have you noticed the change, the shift in the discourse of supporters of Israel? Those of you who are old enough to remember may remember that in the past it was very respectable for very mainstream, liberal, even left-wing people to support Zionism and to support Israel. That's changed now. Those people are becoming critical of Israel, or they're staying silent. They don't yet have the courage to speak up, but they're not going out of their way to defend what Israel is doing. Where has Israel's support base moved in this country? It's moved to the very far right. It's moved to the most Islamophobic, the most racist, the most xenophobic segments of this country and its political elite. And that has real consequences. Not only is the kind of support for Israel more vicious than it used to be. It's more about, you may have heard the controversy in the past few days about the City University of New York, where they refused to give an honorary degree to the playwright Tony Kushner because he had allegedly criticized Israel. I'm not particularly interested in what Tony Kushner said. But what was amazing is that one of the trustees of the City University of New York, of CUNY, gave an interview to the New York Times where he was asked why he had made this decision to veto the honorary degree for Tony Kushner. And he said, and it's printed in the New York Times, because Palestinians are not human. Those words are printed in the New York Times. His name is Wieselman. Who else in 2011, against which other group in 2011 can you stand up in the United States and say they are not human? And much more to retain a public position after declaring that an entire group of human beings are not human. In a way, I think this should encourage us, because it goes to show that the support for Israel's oppression and apartheid now exists among the most extreme people. And it is up to us to go out and win the rest. And I really believe we can do it. I think, and I have the privilege of traveling to so many places, to colleges, to universities, to churches, to all sorts of communities, and I see that we are a growing movement. You may feel that here in North Carolina you're toiling away in a little corner. They may feel that in Victoria, British Columbia. But when I look at everybody, I see a movement, and it's really coalescing around boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I want to end, I know that we're starting, I can hear some of the stomachs rumbling out there in the room. I know mine is. I want to end by coming back to the Nakba. You know, everything I learned about Palestine, I learned from my parents, like many of us. My parents are both born in Palestine. Alhamdulillah, they're both in good health. They live in Amman. They both left Palestine at an early age. My mother from the village of Lifta, which has been in the news a lot because it's one of the few intact Palestinian villages that was depopulated. In any other country, a place like Lifta would be declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it would be protected. Not just Lifta, but other places too, to preserve what's left of Palestinian heritage that has not yet been destroyed. But Lifta is now targeted for destruction by Israel to turn it into luxury Jews-only condominiums. And there is a campaign to save Lifta. Lifta, though, is a symbol for all Palestinian villages and for the possibility of return. We have to think of return as real, not imaginary, because Lifta is there, and the people of Lifta are there. They're just separated. And they're separated by a racist system that says you can't come back to this place that you belong to because you're from the wrong religion. And that kind of racism that is at the heart of Zionism is really what stands in the way of justice. But when I think about my parents, and I hope they will always stay in good health, but I think about the 63 years they've lived since the Nakba. And I know that many others in this room have parents and grandparents who had similar experiences. That we owe it to them to see justice, not just in the lifetimes of the beautiful young children who opened this evening, but in the lifetimes of our parents and grandparents. And that is the time scale that I am working on. I believe that we should look for a dramatic transformation in the situation in Palestine, not in 50 years or 30 years, but in 5 years. And I believe it's possible if we continue to build the momentum of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I think it's possible if our parents encourage us and support us to get involved and do activism. I remember when I went to university, my parents, like many others, said, we're not sending you to university to get involved in politics, we're sending you to get an education. And I did get an education, thanks to my parents. But I also got involved in politics. I got involved in educating people about Palestine. And we need to encourage our children, our young people, the leaders of this generation to be involved and to be the leaders, because I think that this generation is going to be the generation that sees the liberation of Palestine. A true liberation for all its people from the river to the sea. Thank you very much. Thank you.